What happens when a country music icon sits down at the table of daytime television's most unpredictable talk show and refuses to play by the rules? What unfolds is a conversation so explosive, so raw, that it ends with one of the most shocking walkouts in talk show history. This is the story of how Gretchen Wilson turned a routine interview into a moment that would change The View forever. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about what went down. Now, let's get into it. Asterisk, the studio audience settled into their seats as the familiar theme music faded. The panel was assembled, coffee mugs in hand, and the cameras began rolling. Joy Behar sat at her usual spot, shuffling through note cards as the show's producer gave the 30-second warning. Today's guest was supposed to be a light segment, a feel-good interview about new music and life on the road. Gretchen Wilson, the country music star who broke through with her anthem about working-class America, was scheduled to talk about her latest album and upcoming tour. Asterisk, as Gretchen walked onto the set, the audience applauded warmly. She wore jeans, boots, and a leather jacket, her signature style that had always set her apart from the polished Nashville establishment. She shook hands with each host, taking her seat across from the panel. Joy smiled broadly, welcoming her to the show. Joy started with what seemed like a softball question. So, Gretchen, you've been making music for over 2 decades now. Your fans love that you've stayed true to your roots. Tell us what inspired the new album. Asterisk, Gretchen leaned back in her chair, comfortable and confident. Well, Joy, this album is about truth. It's about saying what needs to be said without worrying about who it might upset. I think we've gotten to a place in this country where people are afraid to speak their minds, and I'm not interested in that game. The other hosts nodded politely, but Joy's expression shifted slightly. She glanced down at her cards before looking back up. That's interesting. So, you're not worried about alienating fans who might disagree with you? Asterisk, Gretchen met her gaze. Directly, I make music for working people. Joy. The folks who get up every day, punch a clock, and do what needs to be done. Those people don't have time for all the noise. They want authenticity. If some people don't like that, they were never really listening in the first place. Joy set down her cards, a signal that she was about to go off script. But don't you think? Artists have a responsibility to use their platform wisely. I mean, you have influence. What you say matters. Asterisk, Gretchen's jaw tightened just slightly. I think what matters is honesty. I'm not here to tell people what to think. I'm here to sing about life as I see it, as they see it. That's always been my job. Joy leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge. But there's a difference between honesty and being divisive, don't you think? Some of the things you've said in recent interviews about politics, about certain social issues, they've been pretty controversial. The audience grew quiet. This wasn't the friendly chat they'd expected. Asterisk, Gretchen didn't break eye contact. Controversial. To who, Joy? Because the people I talk to every night at my shows don't think it's controversial to love your country. They don't think it's controversial to want to work hard and take care of your family. Maybe what's controversial is that those values don't get much respect in certain circles. Joy's co-hosts exchanged glances. One of them attempted to interject with a lighter comment, but Joy waved her off. No. I want to understand this. Gretchen, are you saying that people who disagree with you don't love their country? Because that seems like a pretty extreme position. Asterisk, Gretchen shook her head. That's not what I said at all, and you know it. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. You take someone's words, twist them into something they're not, and then act offended by the thing you just made up. I said I sing for working people who love their country. That doesn't mean other people don't, but I'm not going to apologize for my audience or my message. Joy's face flushed. I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking you to clarify your statements. You've been pretty vocal about your political views, and they align with a certain segment of the population that frankly a lot of people find problematic. Asterisk now. Gretchen leaned forward. A certain segment? You mean half the country. Because last time I checked, Joy, this nation is pretty evenly divided on a lot of issues. Just because you and your friends in Manhattan see things one way doesn't make it the only way. And calling millions of Americans problematic, well, that says more about you than it does about them. The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera. Operators glanced at each other, unsure whether to keep rolling. The producers in the booth were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial. But Joy wasn't backing down. Asterisk, I think what's problematic. Gretchen is refusing to acknowledge that some viewpoints are simply wrong. Some positions don't deserve a platform. When you stand up and defend policies that hurt people, when you align yourself with politicians who spread misinformation, you become part of the problem. Gretchen's voice remained steady, but her words cut like steel. And who gets to decide what's wrong? Joy, you. This show. The media. Because from where I'm sitting, the people who claim to be the most tolerant are often the most judgmental. Never said everyone has to agree with me, but you seem to think everyone should agree with you, or they're not just wrong, they're bad people. That's not tolerance, that's arrogance. Asterisk Joy stood up from her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The other hosts looked alarmed. Joy, one of them said softly. Maybe we should take a breath here, but Joy ignored her colleague. You know what, Gretchen? I've been doing this job for a long time. I've interviewed hundreds of guests, and I've always tried to have respectful conversations, even with people I disagree with, but I will not sit here and provide a platform for someone who refuses to acknowledge basic facts, who dismisses legitimate concerns, and who wraps herself in the flag while ignoring the real struggles of real people. Asterisk, Gretchen stood as well, now matching Joy's intensity. Basic facts, according to who? And I wrap myself in the flag. I come from nothing. Joy. I worked every job you can imagine before I ever made $1 from music. I know what real struggle looks like because I lived it. So don't you dare lecture me about real people and their real problems. The difference between us is that I still live in the same world they do. When was the last time you spent a day outside your bubble? The audience was completely silent now. This had gone far beyond a typical debate. This was personal, raw, and spiraling into territory that daytime television rarely ventured. Asterisk Joy's voice rose. I have spent my entire career giving voice to people who don't have one. I have fought for civil rights, for women's rights, for equality and justice. Rights, for women's rights, for equality and justice. What have you done besides sing songs that make people feel good about their prejudices? Asterisk Gretchen's eyes narrowed. There it is. That's what you really think, isn't it? That anyone who doesn't see the world exactly like you must be a bigot. That working-class Americans who go to church and believe in traditional values are somehow less enlightened than you. You know what your problem is, Joy. You've spent so much time telling people what to think that you've forgotten how to listen. Asterisk 1. Of the other hosts stood up, trying to physically position herself between the two women. Ladies, please. We're all getting heated here. Let's take a commercial break and come back when everyone's had a chance to cool down. Asterisk, but Joy shook her head violently. No, I want an answer. Gretchen, do you or do you not support politicians who have actively worked to restrict voting rights, who have demonized immigrants, who have rolled back protections for vulnerable communities? Asterisk Gretchen took a deep breath. I support leaders who I believe will make this country stronger and more prosperous. I support policies that let people keep more of what they earn, that don't punish success, that respect individual freedom. If you disagree with that, fine. But stop acting like your opinion is moral authority and mine is moral failure. Joy threw her hands up. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You hide behind platitudes while supporting people who cause real harm. You can't just say you support freedom and prosperity when the policies you're defending literally take those things away from people. Gretchen's voice finally rose to match Joy's volume. And you can't just scream that everyone who disagrees with you is causing harm. That's not an argument, Joy. That's a tantrum. I came here to talk about music, about connecting with an audience, about art. But apparently, that's not allowed unless I first pledge allegiance to your worldview. The other hosts were now standing too, trying desperately to regain control of the segment. The show's producer had given up on salvaging the interview and was signaling for a commercial break. But before the cameras could cut away, Joy Behar did something no one expected. She untied her microphone. You know what, Gretchen? You're right. About one thing. I have been doing this for a long time. Too long, maybe, because I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending that all opinions are equally valid. I'm tired of giving airtime to people who use their platforms to divide rather than unite. And I'm especially tired of being told that I'm intolerant. Because I won't tolerate intolerance. She placed the microphone on the table with a decisive thud. I've spent years on this show trying to have meaningful conversations, trying to bridge divides, trying to make people think. But if this is what it's come to, if we're at a place where we can't even agree on basic reality, then maybe it's time for me to step aside and let someone else try. The studio fell into stunned silence. Gretchen stood frozen for a moment, watching. Joy's hands trembled slightly as they released the microphone. The other hosts were paralyzed, unsure whether this was a dramatic gesture or something more permanent. The audience barely breathed. Every person leaning forward in their seats, trying to process what they were witnessing. Joy, one of the co-hosts, finally said, her voice shaking. Joy, come on. Let's just take a break. We can talk about this but... Joy shook her head slowly, her eyes still locked on Gretchen. No, I mean it. I'm done. I've said what I needed to say, and clearly I'm not the right person for this anymore. Not if this is what we're doing now. Gretchen's expression shifted from defiance to something more complex. Confusion mixed with what might have been concern. Joy, I didn't come here to make you quit your job. I came here to have a conversation. Joy let out a bitter laugh. A conversation. Is that what you call it? Tibia? Because from where I'm standing, it felt more like a confrontation, and maybe that's on me. Maybe I've lost the ability to have these conversations without getting angry. But I'm not going to apologize for caring about things that matter. Gretchen took a step closer to the table. I'm not asking you to apologize for caring. I'm asking you to understand that other people care too, just about different things. That doesn't make them your enemy. Joy's voice cracked slightly. But when the things you care about actively harm the things I care about, Gretchen, what am I supposed to do? Just smile and nod. Just agree to disagree while people suffer the consequences of bad policy and dangerous rhetoric. I can't do that anymore. One host attempted to intervene. Joy, you're one of the most important voices on this show, on television. We need you here. Please, just sit down. Let's breathe for a minute. Joy turned to face her colleague, and for the first time her eyes were glistening with tears. She was fighting to hold back. Sarah, I appreciate that. I really do. But look at it. Me? I'm shaking. I'm so angry I can barely think straight. This isn't who I want to be. This isn't the kind of conversation I want to have. And if I can't have the conversations I believe in without losing myself like this, then what's the point? Asterisk Gretchen spoke again, her voice softer now, but still firm. You talk about harm, Joy. You talk about consequences. But do you know what harms people? Being dismissed, being told that their values don't matter, that their way of life is backwards or ignorant. I've watched people in small towns all across this country get talked down to by people who've never spent a day in their shoes. That does damage, real damage. Asterisk's Joy wiped at her eyes quickly, refusing to let herself fully cry. And I've watched people lose their rights. I've watched families torn apart. I've watched hatred get emboldened because people in power gave it permission. So forgive me if I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who feel dismissed when they're supporting the very systems that cause that pain. Joy turned back to face her directly. And do you understand that good intentions don't absolve people of responsibility? That you can be a kind person in your personal life and still support systems that cause harm? That's what you're not getting, Gretchen. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying that the political alignment you're defending has real-world consequences that hurt real people. Asterisk. Gretchen threw her hands up. Everything has consequences, Joy. Every policy, every decision, every vote. The question is, who gets to decide which consequences matter more? You've decided that your priorities are the right ones, the moral ones, and anyone who has different priorities is wrong. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism, dressed up in progressive language. Asterisk Joy's face went pale, then flushed red. Authoritarianism. You're calling me authoritarian. I'm fighting for people's freedom, Gretchen. I'm fighting for equality and justice and basic human dignity. Asterisk Gretchen didn't back down. And I'm fighting for people to be able to live their lives without being told they're terrible people if they don't agree with every item on someone else's agenda. I'm fighting for the idea that a person can be religious without being a bigot, can support law enforcement without hating minorities, can want secure borders without being racist. But apparently, that's too much nuance for this conversation. Asterisk Joy's voice rose again. Nuance. You want to talk about nuance? Where's the nuance when your side is banning books, attacking teachers, stripping away reproductive rights? Where's the nuance when people are being denied healthcare? When kids are going hungry? When the planet is burning? Don't lecture me about nuance when the policies you're defending are destroying lives. Asterisk Gretchen stepped even closer now, her voice matching Joy's intensity. My side. See, that's the problem right there. You've divided this entire country into sides, into us versus them. And anyone on the other side from you is automatically wrong, automatically harmful, automatically the enemy. You know what that leads to, Joy? It leads to exactly the kind of hatred you claim to be fighting against. Asterisk one of the producers had made it down from the booth and was now standing just off camera, making frantic gestures. But neither woman was paying attention to anything except each other. The other hosts had essentially given up trying to moderate and were simply watching, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Asterisk Joy's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. I have spent my entire career building bridges, Gretchen. I have had thousands of conversations with people I disagree with. I have listened. I have tried to understand. I have extended empathy and grace even when it wasn't returned. But there comes a point where you have to draw a line. There comes a point where you have to say, enough is enough. And I've reached that point. Asterisk Gretchen's eyes flashed. So, you're drawing the line at me, at people like me. Working-class Americans who didn't go to fancy schools, who don't have connections in media or entertainment, who just want to live their lives and raise their kids and be left alone. That's where you draw your line. Asterisk's Joy shook her head violently. I'm drawing the line at the refusal to acknowledge reality. I'm drawing the line at the celebration of willful ignorance. I'm drawing the line at the normalization of cruelty. Yes, if you're part of that, if you're contributing to it, then yes. That's where I draw my line. Asterisk Gretchen's laugh was sharp and humorless. Willful ignorance. That's rich. You sit here in New York City, surrounded by people who all think exactly like you, and you call other people ignorant. You've never had to struggle the way real Americans struggle. You've never had to choose between paying your electric bill and buying groceries. You've never had to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head. But sure, tell me more about reality. Asterisk Joy's voice went quiet, which was somehow more frightening than when she'd been yelling. You don't know anything about my life, Gretchen. You don't know where I came from or what I've been through. And you're making the exact same assumptions about me that you're accusing me of making about you. Asterisk Gretchen nodded slowly. You're right. I don't know your life, but you don't know mine either. You don't know the lives of the people who come to my shows, who buy my records, who relate to my music because it speaks to their experience. And yet, you feel perfectly comfortable judging all of us, dismissing all of us as if our perspective has no value. Asterisk Joy picked up her microphone again, but didn't put it back on. Instead, she held it in her hand, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. You know what the saddest part of this is, Gretchen? I actually agree with some of what you're saying.